What I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about the woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. Elizabeth Gilbert, the woman who taught millions to find happiness, almost became a murderer. Her victim, the woman she loved most in the world. This isn't fiction. This is her confession. In her new book, All the Way to the River, Gilbert admits she planned to kill her dying girlfriend to end both their suffering. But this story isn't about murder. It's about the most dangerous addiction of all, love addiction, and how it nearly destroyed the woman who preached self-love to the world. I'm going to spend the next 40 minutes taking you through one of the most shocking memoirs ever written. We'll explore how success can mask addiction, how love can become a drug, and how recovery is possible even from the darkest places. You'll learn about Elizabeth's secret 16-year friendship with Raya Elias, the cancer diagnosis that changed everything, the addiction spiral that nearly killed them both, and the murder plot that finally woke Gilbert up. This isn't just celebrity gossip. This is a masterclass in recognizing love addiction, and it might save your life or someone you love. Let me give you the full context of who Elizabeth Gilbert was before this story begins. Born in 1969, she became a successful writer in her 20s. Her breakthrough came with Eat, Pray, Love in 2006, a memoir about leaving her marriage, traveling the world, and finding herself. The book sold over 30 million copies worldwide, was translated into dozens of languages, and became a movie starring Julia Roberts. Gilbert became the poster child for female empowerment, spiritual awakening, and self-discovery. She gave TED Talks, went on opera multiple times, and built a brand around helping women find their authentic selves. Millions of people looked to her for wisdom about relationships, spirituality, and personal growth. But here's what nobody knew behind the scenes. Gilbert was struggling with patterns that would eventually nearly destroy her. She was a people pleaser, a perfectionist, and someone who got her sense of worth from being needed by others. What we're about to explore isn't just Gilbert's story. It's a case study in how unhealed trauma, codependency, and love addiction can lurk beneath even the most successful exterior. In September 2025, Gilbert released All the Way to the River, and it shattered every assumption her fans had about her. This isn't another inspirational memoir. This is a confession so raw that some readers have called it too much information. Before we dive deep into this story, I need you to do something. Think about your own relationships, romantic, friendships, family. Have you ever felt like you couldn't live without someone? Have you ever stayed in chaos because peace felt boring? Have you ever lost yourself completely in trying to save someone else? If any of that sounds familiar, drop "guilty" in the comments. Share this video with someone who might need to hear this story. And hit that like button because what we're about to explore could literally change how you see love forever. Studies show that 1 in 10 people struggle with love addiction, but most don't even know it has a name. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what it looks like, why it's so dangerous, and how to recover from it. Our story begins in the year 2000. Elizabeth Gilbert, already an established writer with several books under her belt, walked into a Manhattan salon for a haircut. The hairdresser who greeted her was Raya Elias, and their meeting would change both their lives forever. Raya wasn't just any hairdresser. She was 40 years old, Lebanese-American, and had lived more life than most people could imagine. Born in Syria, raised in Michigan, she'd been a punk rocker in the 1980s New York scene, a filmmaker, a musician, and a storyteller with enough charisma to command any room. She was also a recovering heroin addict who'd been clean for over a decade. Raya had the kind of raw honesty that comes from surviving rock bottom and clawing your way back to life. Gilbert and Raya became instant friends. Not the casual, let's grab coffee sometime kind of friends, the deep, soul-level connection that feels like finding a missing piece of yourself. Raya had this theory about friendship that she'd explain using a map of Manhattan. She'd say that most people in your life are Fifth Avenue friends, right in the center, superficial, professional contacts who don't really know you. As you move east, you get Second Avenue friends, First Avenue friends, people who know you better, who you're more honest with. Then there are Avenue A, B, C, and D friends. These are the people who might bail you out of jail or take you to rehab. But if you're really lucky, and most people never find this, you might have one person who will walk with you all the way to the East River. This is the friend who knows everything about you, the person you call when you have absolutely nowhere else to turn. Gilbert and Rhea were all the way to the river friends from day one. They talked for hours, shared their deepest secrets, and developed the kind of intimacy that transcends typical friendship boundaries. For the next 16 years, they were inseparable. Gilbert was married to Jose Nunes, a Brazilian businessman, and lived a seemingly perfect life in New Jersey. Rhea had her own relationships, her creative work, her recovery community, but their friendship remained the constant. Looking back, Gilbert admits there were warning signs that this friendship was more intense than healthy. She scheduled her travel around being able to see Rhea. She felt anxious when they went too long without talking. She got jealous when Rhea spent time with other friends. But here's what makes this story so important. Gilbert didn't recognize these as red flags. In our culture, we celebrate intense friendships. We think jealousy means you care deeply. We confuse obsession with devotion. For 16 years, Gilbert and Rhea maintained this intensity without it becoming romantic. They had what Gilbert calls the perfect friendship. But perfection, as we're about to see, can be its own kind of prison. I want to pause here and talk about something that might be uncomfortable. How many of you have had a friendship that felt more important than your romantic relationships? How many of you have friends you can't imagine living without? Research shows that intense friendships often serve as practice grounds for love addiction. We learn patterns of emotional dependency that we later carry into romantic relationships. Think about your closest friendship right now. Are you able to be happy when they're happy with other people? Can you go weeks without talking and feel secure? Or do you need constant contact, reassurance, and attention from them? There's nothing wrong with close friendships. They're essential for mental health. But when friendship becomes a source of identity, when someone else's mood determines your entire day, when you can't function without their approval, that's when friendship crosses into addiction territory. Gilbert and Rhea's friendship was about to be tested in the most extreme way possible. And what happened next would reveal just how deep their emotional dependency really ran. May 2016. Rhea Elias, now 55 years old, went to the doctor complaining of abdominal pain. The diagnosis was devastating: pancreatic cancer that had already spread to her liver. Stage 4, terminal. Pancreatic cancer has one of the worst survival rates of any cancer. When it spread to the liver, the average life expectancy is 36 months. Rhea was given less than a year to live. Gilbert describes getting this phone call as the moment her world ended. Not just because her best friend was dying, but because of what she realized in that hospital waiting room. She writes, "Sitting in that sterile hallway, I finally admitted to myself what I'd been hiding for 16 years. I wasn't just losing my best friend. I was losing the love of my life, and I had never even told her." Think about this situation. Gilbert is married. Rhea is in a relationship. They've been best friends for 16 years without ever crossing physical boundaries. But faced with terminal cancer, Gilbert suddenly realizes she's been in love this whole time. Gilbert describes the moment she told Rhea about her feelings. They were in Rhea's apartment, surrounded by medical equipment and cancer pamphlets. Gilbert expected rejection, confusion, maybe the end of their friendship. Instead, Rhea said, "I've been waiting 16 years for you to figure that out." She had been in love too, all along, but had never acted on it because Gilbert was married and seemed committed to her heterosexual life. What happened next shocked everyone who knew them. Within weeks, Gilbert made a decision that would destroy her marriage, shock her family, and set in motion a chain of events that nearly killed them both. She left Jose, her husband of several years. Not gradually, not after careful consideration, but immediately. She announced on social media that her marriage was over and that she was in love with Rhea. The public reaction was intense. Some fans celebrated Gilbert for living authentically. Others accused her of abandoning her husband when he needed her most, of having an affair, of being selfish and impulsive. In September 2016, just months after Rhea's diagnosis, Gilbert and Rhea had a commitment ceremony. Picture this: a woman dying of cancer marrying her best friend who just left her husband, while everyone around them wondered if this was love or crisis response. Looking back, Gilbert admits this was the beginning of her descent into love addiction. Every decision was based on Rhea's timeline, Rhea's needs, Rhea's illness. Gilbert completely abandoned her own life, her own needs, her own identity. This is classic codependency behavior, using someone else's crisis to avoid dealing with your own issues. Gilbert thought she was being a devoted partner. Actually, she was using Raya's cancer as an escape from her own unhealed trauma. For a few months, it seemed like a beautiful love story. Two soulmates finally together, making the most of limited time. They traveled, they created art together, they lived with an intensity that felt like the ultimate romantic experience. But intense doesn't mean healthy. And what happened next would prove that love without boundaries, love based on crisis, love that requires you to abandon yourself, that's not love at all. That's addiction. I want to pause here because this part of the story triggers a lot of people. Some see Gilbert as a hero for following her heart. Others see her as selfish for leaving her husband during a crisis. But here's what I think we're missing. Gilbert's decision wasn't really about love or authenticity. It was about addiction. When you're addicted to intensity, crisis becomes your drug of choice. Think about it, Gilbert's entire brand was built on dramatic life changes. Leaving her marriage for eat, pray, love made her famous. Leaving another marriage for a dying woman fit the same pattern. Love addicts are drawn to impossible situations because the adrenaline rush of crisis mimics the feeling of passion. The more dramatic the circumstances, the more real the love feels. Have you ever noticed that your most intense relationships were also your most unstable ones? Have you ever confused chaos with chemistry? Comment below if you've ever stayed in a relationship because the drama felt like passion. What Gilbert didn't realize was that by making Raya's crisis her identity, she was setting them both up for a spiral that would nearly end in murder-suicide. Because when crisis is your drug, you'll do anything to keep the supply coming. Here's where Gilbert's story becomes a textbook case of love addiction, destroying two lives simultaneously. The moment they became romantic partners, everything that had been healthy about their friendship turned toxic. First, Raya relapsed. She had been clean from heroin for over 15 years, but within months of getting together with Gilbert, she was using cocaine, alcohol, and prescription medications. She would disappear for days, lie about her whereabouts, and become verbally abusive when confronted. And Gilbert, instead of setting boundaries or getting help, she became Raya's full-time enabler. She gave her money for drugs while pretending it was for groceries. She lied to friends and family about Raya's condition. She made Raya's addiction her full-time job. This is where we need to understand what love addiction actually looks like. It's not about loving someone too much. It's about using someone else's problems to avoid your own life. Gilbert admits in the book that she became addicted to being needed. Every crisis gave her purpose. Every emergency made her feel important. Every time Raya fell apart, Gilbert felt more essential. She describes a typical day, wake up wondering what mood Raya would be in, spend hours trying to manage Raya's emotions, cancel her own plans to deal with Raya's crises, go to bed exhausted but feeling like a devoted partner. Love addicts always isolate. Gilbert stopped seeing friends who questioned the relationship. She avoided family members who were concerned. She created a bubble where only she and Raya existed and everyone else was the enemy. She spent thousands of dollars on alternative cancer treatments, luxury travel, and what she later realized were drug purchases disguised as medical needs. Money became another way to show love, another form of enabling. Gilbert's health deteriorated. She stopped exercising, eating properly, or taking care of herself. She developed anxiety, insomnia, and what she describes as a constant state of emergency living. Meanwhile, Raya became increasingly abusive. She would scream at Gilbert for hours, blame her for everything wrong in her life, and then love-bomb her with apologies and promises to change. This created what psychologists call a trauma bond. Gilbert became addicted to the cycle of abuse and reconciliation. The relief after each fight felt like love, but it was actually just the end of psychological torture. Gilbert describes finding Raya unconscious from drug overdoses multiple times. She describes being screamed at in public, humiliated in front of friends, and treated like a servant rather than a partner. But here's the key to understanding love addiction. Gilbert justified everything. She's dying, she told herself. She's in pain, she doesn't mean it. If I just love her enough, she'll get better. Studies show that intermittent reinforcement, random rewards mixed with punishment, creates the strongest psychological bonds. Slot machines work on this principle. So do abusive relationships. By late 2017, Gilbert was having what she calls murderous thoughts. Not thoughts of anger, but actual plans to kill Rhea to end her suffering, then kill herself because she couldn't live without her. Let me be absolutely clear about what was happening here. The woman who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, who taught millions about self-love and finding inner peace, was researching murder-suicide methods online. Gilbert admits she researched overdose methods, suffocation techniques, and ways to make it look accidental. She wanted to end Rhea's suffering, but she also wanted to die herself because living without Rhea felt impossible. This wasn't about mercy killing or romantic devotion. This was about withdrawal. Gilbert was so addicted to being Rhea's caregiver that losing her felt like dying. The murder-suicide plan was actually about avoiding the pain of withdrawal from her love addiction. The moment that saved them both came on a Tuesday night in December 2017. Gilbert walked into their apartment and found Rhea shooting cocaine while connected to her cancer treatment IV. Gilbert describes this moment. "I realized I wasn't helping her die with dignity. I was helping her die in chaos. And I wasn't living, I was just managing her dying." That night, Gilbert called a friend who was in recovery and said the words that would save her life. "I think I need help. I think I'm addicted to loving her." Her friend said something that shattered Gilbert's entire worldview. Loving someone doesn't mean dying with them. Sometimes loving someone means saving yourself. What happened next was the hardest thing Gilbert had ever done. She got help for an addiction she didn't even know existed. She started attending Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous meetings. Yes, that's a real thing, and it's not what you might think. It's for people addicted to the drama of relationships, the intensity of emotional chaos, and the identity of being someone's savior. Gilbert got a sponsor, worked the steps, and for the first time in her adult life, looked at her patterns honestly. She realized she had been using other people's problems to avoid her own healing since childhood. Her sponsor told her something that seemed impossible. If she really loved Rhea, she needed to physically separate from her during her final months. Gilbert moved out. While Rhea was dying of cancer, Gilbert chose to live separately because their relationship had become toxic for both of them. People were horrified. How could she abandon a dying partner? But Gilbert learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's self-destruction. Rhea died in January 2018, alone in a hospital room. Gilbert wasn't there because being present would have triggered her own relapse into codependent behavior. For the first time in her adult life, Gilbert grieved without using someone else's crisis to avoid her own feelings. It was excruciating, but it was clean grief, not grief mixed with addiction withdrawal. So what can we learn from Elizabeth Gilbert's journey from love addiction to recovery? First, addiction doesn't care about your success, wealth, or spiritual evolution. It will find your weakness and exploit it. Second, love addiction is real addiction. If you can't be happy without someone, if you lose yourself in relationships, if chaos feels like passion, you might need help. Third, recovery is possible, but it requires completely changing how you think about love. Real love doesn't require you to sacrifice yourself. Real love is sustainable, peaceful, and allows both people to grow. Today, Gilbert is in recovery, in therapy, and learning what healthy relationships look like. She's dating again, but slowly, with boundaries, and with a sponsor to help her recognize old patterns. Writing this book was part of her recovery process, making amends by telling the truth, even when it makes her look bad. If this story resonated with you, please share it. If you recognized yourself in Gilbert's patterns, consider getting help. Love addiction is treatable, but only if we're willing to face the truth about our relationships. Elizabeth Gilbert went from planning murder to finding peace. She went from being addicted to chaos to creating sustainable love. Recovery is possible, even from the deepest, darkest places. Because the goal isn't to find someone to complete you. The goal is to become whole enough that you can love without losing yourself, care without controlling, and connect without becoming addicted to another person's chaos.